The last thing I remember was being with the man I was secretly in love with. Then I woke up in a stranger's car, outside a house that no longer knew my name. What I uncovered next destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive into today's story, I've got something exciting to share. I've just launched a brand new YouTube channel called Soulfell Chronicles. It's where I'll be posting more of these raw, emotional stories, real talk, and some deeper dives into the experiences that shape us. If you've been moved by any of my stories, I'd be incredibly grateful if you checked it out. Give it a like, maybe hit that subscribe button and help me build something meaningful. The link's down in the description. Alright, let's get into it. I don't know if I blacked out or just zoned out, but when I came to, my forehead was pressed against the steering wheel. That moment when your senses snap back all at once, I realized I was parked right in front of Evan's house. And strangely enough, this wave of comfort passed over me, like I'd just woken up in a place where everything always somehow felt right. Being around him had that effect. Things just had a way of aligning even when the rest of my life felt scattered. I glanced down at my wristwatch and, almost instantly, this tight knot of urgency clenched in my chest. I was supposed to be back at the clinic by now. But when I tried to piece together how I ended up here, my thoughts felt tangled and cloudy. Had I seen Evan this morning? We must have spent time together. Why else would I be sitting in his driveway at this hour in this car? Trying to shake off the fog in my head, I reached over to buckle my seatbelt and pressed the push-to-start button. Nothing happened. Not even a sound. My heart gave a small stutter. I've never been one to understand cars beyond the basics. I know they have 4 wheels and need gas, and that's about it. But this keyless ignition was acting completely dead. I opened the door and stepped out, and that's when this weird, woozy sensation hit me. Everything felt just slightly off, like I was dreaming but fully awake. My heart started racing as I took a closer look at the car from the outside. It looked exactly like mine. Same color, same little dent by the fender, parked in the exact spot I usually pull into. But there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It felt familiar, yet foreign. And that's when it really hit me. I hadn't been drinking. I was sure of it. So why did everything feel so unreal, so foggy, like I was standing in someone else's life? My eyes drifted toward the passenger seat, where a purse sat casually like it belonged there. I reached for it, hoping for some kind of clue, but as soon as I touched it, this icy dread coiled in my gut. That wasn't my purse. Trying to stay calm, I unzipped it and started sifting through. My fingers closed around a phone. I pressed the power button and watched the screen flicker, but something was off. The interface didn't look like mine at all. Different icons, unfamiliar background. It wasn't my phone. That's when the chill truly set in. My spine stiffened and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was very, very wrong. I tried to use the phone to look up a nearby tow truck, hoping I could just sort all this out quietly, but the screen just stared back at me, showing no signal. Great. I was already unraveling, and this was the last thing I needed. I figured I'd call Paul, my husband. If anyone could take charge and fix a mess, it was him. But again, nothing. No bars. No signal. That's when the panic really started creeping in. I could feel it bubbling under my ribs, rising fast. I forced myself to take a breath and ground myself. Mary Ellen, I reminded myself. My name is Mary Ellen. Just saying it in my head gave me something solid to hold on to. I wasn't losing it. I knew who I was. My mom, she's been dealing with severe kidney problems for a while now. She goes in for dialysis twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday morning at 8 a.m., and she stays there until just before noon. It's become a kind of routine. I usually drop her off, make sure she's settled, then I either run a few errands or spend some time at the stables. And while she's at her appointments, well, that's when I come here. To Evan's. I met Evan just about a month after my mom began her treatments. He swept in out of nowhere, charming in that dangerous, irresistible kind of way. The kind of man who lights a match in a room full of gasoline. Our affair started in the most reckless of places, one of the doctor's lounges at the clinic. That first moment, all fire and risk, nearly got us caught. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Since then, I've been slipping away to his place whenever I could, feeding this craving I didn't even know I had, for something thrilling, forbidden, and completely mine. But as I stood outside that car, the car that now didn't feel like mine, holding a phone I didn't recognize, nothing about this moment felt thrilling. Felt terrifying. And then there was Paul. My husband. He's a force of nature in the corporate world. The kind of man who walks into a failing business and tears it down to the studs without blinking. He's sharp, driven, and cold in the way only very successful men can be. We have 2 kids together. William, who's just started 10th grade, and Andrea, who's 2 years younger. Both of them are athletes, competitive, full of energy. Most weekends, I'm out there on the sidelines, team mom with the snacks and the sunscreen, smiling like everything's picture perfect. Paul makes sure we don't want for anything. Our home, our lifestyle, he's provided all of it. I've got my horses, my dressage competitions, and then there's Evan who gave me the kind of escape I never knew I needed. But none of that explained what was happening now. None of it made sense of why I was standing in front of this car that looked exactly like mine but didn't feel like mine, holding a phone that clearly wasn't mine, outside Evan's house that, suddenly in a way I couldn't explain, didn't feel like his house at all. My stomach twisted with unease. I stuffed the phone back into the purse and walked up to the front door, trying to steady myself. My hand trembled slightly as I rang the bell, expecting to see Evan's familiar sly grin the moment the door opened. But when it did open, the face staring back at me was someone I had never seen before. A man, older than Evan, with a serious expression and questioning eyes. I instinctively took a step back. Is Evan here? I asked, my voice catching in my throat. He looked at me, clearly confused. I'm sorry, who? Evan, I repeated, my voice shaking now. Does he live here? He shook his head slowly. There's no one by that name here. My pulse thundered in my ears. Everything inside me screamed that something was off. This was supposed to be Evan's place. I'd been here so many times before. Hadn't I? I think you've got the wrong house, I managed to say, but before I could even finish, the man shut the door right in my face. The sound of it closing echoed in my ears. Cold dread sank into my chest like ice water. That couldn't be right. I knew this house. I had just been inside. I had been with Evan, hadn't I? I stared at the door for a second, heart pounding, then rang the bell again, harder this time, like maybe the force would jolt something into place. Through the narrow window next to the door, I saw the man again. He was peeking through the curtain now, and his face was tight with frustration. Go away, he barked. You've got the wrong address. I stepped back, almost tripping over the edge of the porch. My breathing was shallow and fast, my legs wobbling beneath me. I turned toward the car, that car, the one I'd been in just minutes ago, but it no longer felt like anything belonged to me. I stood there for what felt like forever, panic flooding every corner of my chest, my thoughts spinning so fast I couldn't grab hold of a single one. Finally, I decided I had to move, do something, anything. I spotted a small corner store about a block down and started toward it, hoping I could at least borrow a phone or ask for help. But just as I reached the door, something made me stop in my tracks. My eyes locked onto a car pulling away from the curb. The car. The one I had been sitting in. Hey, that's my car. I shouted instinctively, raising my hand. But the words felt weightless, like I was yelling into a void. Nobody turned. Nobody looked. Nobody seemed to hear me. It was like the world was fraying at the edges, coming apart in a slow, quiet unraveling, and I was the only one who noticed. Shaking, I pushed open the store's door and stumbled inside. I practically begged the clerk to let me call for help. Please, I gasped. Can you call 911? The officer arrived a few minutes later. By then, I was trembling so badly my teeth were chattering. I handed him my driver's license and tried to explain everything, though the words spilled out in a jumbled mess. He listened without much expression, just nodding, and then walked back to his patrol car. I watched him through the glass, his fingers tapping rapidly on the onboard computer. When he returned, his face was unreadable. He brought his radio up to his shoulder and said something low into it, too quiet for me to make out. Then he looked directly at me. Miss, I'm going to need you to come with me to the station, he said firmly. Place your hands on the hood, please. I froze. Shock slammed into me like a freight train. Wait, what? I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He just moved forward, calm and professional, like this was routine. I was too stunned to resist. I turned and placed my hands on the hood of his car, numb and disoriented, as he gave me a quick pat down. Then he gently but firmly guided me into the back seat of the patrol car. The ride to the precinct felt like a dream, or a nightmare. I stared out the window, watching the city pass by in a blur of color and motion, while my thoughts chased each other in circles, searching for something, anything, that made sense. When we arrived, I was led into a small interview room. It was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. I sat alone for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Then the door opened and two men stepped in. One was older, with salt and pepper hair, and the other looked younger, more direct. I straightened my back and forced a polite nod. Gentlemen, I said, my voice hoarse. The younger one stepped forward and leaned in slightly, his eyes steady and unreadable. Let's start simple, he said. What's your name? I let out a sharp breath. It's right there on my license, I said. Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen R. Emerson. The two men exchanged a quick glance. Then the second one gave a small nod and said, "Would it be all right if we just called you Mary?" I shook my head firm. Mary Ellen. I wasn't about to let go of the one thing I was still certain of, my name. What is this about? I asked, my voice tightening. Do I need to call an attorney? The older officer lifted his hand gently, trying to reassure me. No, Mary Ellen. There's no need for a lawyer. You haven't done anything wrong. We're just a little confused, that's all. There was a pause, then he asked, "Can you tell me today's date? Month, day, and year?" I blinked. That's a weird question, I said, my forehead creasing. But I answered anyway, certain I hadn't lost track of time. Or at least, I thought I was certain. They exchanged another of those unreadable looks between them, then nodded again. All right, the first man said softly. Can you walk us through your morning again? Just take your time. So I did. For the next 15 minutes, I recounted everything I could remember. Well, almost everything. I kept the details about Evan, about what we really did together, pretty vague. I just said we spent time together, nothing more. They asked about my mom, her dialysis appointment, the clinic. They asked about Paul and the kids. I answered everything I could. I didn't hold back, but I was still struggling to make sense of anything myself. When they finished, the two men thanked me politely, offered me some water, and stepped out of the room. Not long after, a female officer came in and escorted me to the restroom and back. Then I sat alone again in that same cold, sterile room, for what felt like forever, at least 30 minutes of nothing but silence and the hum of overhead lights. Finally the door opened. 3 people entered, a woman dressed in business formal, a nurse in scrubs, and the precinct captain. The air in the room seemed to thicken instantly. The captain cleared his throat. Mary Ellen, he said carefully, this is Christina Davidson from the County Department of Human Services. And this is Nurse Jennings. They're here because, well, what I'm about to share may be a little difficult to hear. Something inside me tightened. A chill trickled down my spine, and my heartbeat thudded in my ears. I looked from one face to the next, suddenly dry-mouthed. What do you mean? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Then, like a bomb dropping in a quiet room, the words hit me, declared dead. Missing for 8 years. Time seemed to splinter in that instant. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Years? My last memory, clear and whole, was of waking up that morning in a car thinking I'd just left Evans. It felt like it had happened hours ago, not years. Christina stepped closer and sat beside me. Her expression was calm, professional, but distant, like she was still measuring how much to say. Mary Ellen, she began gently, you've been living with a rare form of medically induced amnesia. It appears you were kept sedated for an extended period of time. The police recovered surveillance footage earlier this morning that shows 2 vehicles dropping you off near the home you identified as Evans. You were unconscious when they left you there. I stared at her, the words not quite registering. You were injected with something, she added. The blood work confirms it, you were heavily sedated when you woke up. And just like that, the floor beneath my reality gave way. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of everything crashing down around me. My voice cracked as I asked, my family, have you contacted them? My mother, my husband, my kids, have you spoken to any of them? Christina paused, her expression softening. She flipped through the papers in her hands slowly, almost hesitantly before answering. Your mother passed away 6 years ago, she said gently. Your husband, he had you legally declared deceased. He's since remarried. Your daughter is currently away at college and we're still working on locating your son. I couldn't breathe for a second. The words hit me like a punch to the ribs. My whole body felt hollow. My chest tightened with a pain that was so much more than physical. It was grief, confusion, and heartbreak tangled together in a way I couldn't begin to untangle. No one looked for me? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Christina exhaled softly, her voice low but steady. Your car was found submerged in a lake near the clinic where your mother received treatment. Given the location and circumstances, the authorities believed you'd drowned. They searched for days, but eventually they ruled it a tragic accident. I stared at her, trying to hold on to something real, something solid. But Evan, he must have told someone. He did, she said with a nod. He told the police that you were with him that night when a group of armed men broke into his house. He was seriously injured, barely survived. When he woke up in the hospital, you were gone. Just gone. She paused again. There was an investigation. The police even looked into your husband. But nothing ever came of it. My head spun. I felt like I was standing in the eye of a storm, everything outside me in chaos, everything inside me fractured. I couldn't keep my eyes open. Christina touched my shoulder and urged me gently to rest. At some point, I drifted into a heavy, dreamless sleep. When I woke again, I was being wheeled away for dialysis. My body felt fragile, like it hadn't moved in years. But my mind? It was racing. 8 years. Gone. Stolen. And I was only just beginning to uncover the truth. Later that day, Christina returned to my room. Her expression was serious. "There's something else," she said quietly. "As far as the state is concerned, you no longer exist. You've been declared deceased. That means no records, no bank accounts, no health insurance. You have no assets in your name." I stared at her numb. "Social services will be stepping in to help," she continued. "Your daughter is on her way. She's reached out to your son and your ex-husband." Ex-husband. The words made my stomach twist. I clenched my fist. "I never divorced him," I said bitterly. That night, sleep barely touched me. Memories kept circling in my head like loose puzzle pieces. Flashes of a treadmill, a dim room, the shadow of a woman's face, but they never fully connected. It was like trying to remember a dream slipping through my fingers. And then the door opened. Andrea, my beautiful daughter. She stepped into the room and froze, her eyes wide and disbelieving. Her face crumpled as the truth hit her. "Mom," she whispered. "It's really you?" Tears stung my eyes as I stood. "Andrea," my voice broke. We fell into each other's arms, holding on tight. For that moment, the rest of the world didn't matter. There was no clinic, no lost years, no strange car or sedatives or broken timelines. Just us. Mother and daughter. We spent hours together, catching up, though I'd never really be able to catch up on all I'd missed. She told me about her high school graduation, my funeral, Paul eventually moving on, William getting married. I even had a grandson. A whole life had unfolded in my absence, and I hadn't been there for any of it. And then she mentioned something else, almost casually. After a while, Dad moved overseas. A sharp pain twisted in my chest. More than just shock, it was betrayal. He hadn't just moved on, he had erased me. Like I was never part of his life at all. Not a wife, not a mother, not even a memory worth holding on to. But the worst hadn't come yet. A few days later, the door to my hospital room opened and the precinct captain stepped inside, his face set with the kind of seriousness that warns you, what you're about to hear is going to change everything. "Mary Ellen," he began, "we've traced the vehicle that dropped you off that morning." I sat up straighter, bracing myself. "The car was registered to a shell company," he continued. "And that company is owned by your ex-husband." I felt the blood drain from my face. "But there's more," he said. "The house where we found you, it was purchased just 2 weeks before your disappearance. And the name listed on the deed as the resident." He paused, watching my reaction carefully. "Demi Harris." My stomach turned. That name. Demi. The face that had haunted my fragmented dreams, blurry and shadowed but always present. The captain nodded, his expression grim. "We conducted a search. In the basement, we discovered evidence that strongly suggests someone was kept there, restrained long-term." I stared at him in disbelief as he continued. "There were prescription bottles, high doses of sedatives, exercise machines that looked like they'd been modified, restraints at the wrists and ankles, photos too, of you, bound." He didn't need to say more. I knew what he meant. "The district attorney is preparing charges against Paul and Demi. Unfortunately," he hesitated, "they've fled. They're currently in a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. The world went still. Cold fury seeped into my veins. Paul, my husband, the father of my children, had done this to me. He hadn't just left me. He'd taken my life, my memories, my children, my freedom. And just when I thought the nightmare had reached its peak, Andrea walked in holding a letter. Her hands were shaking. "It's from him," she said, her voice barely holding together. I couldn't respond. I didn't want to. I didn't have the strength. But Andrea didn't flinch. "I want William to hear this too," she said. She pulled out her phone and called her brother, putting him on speaker. Once he answered, she unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "Mary Ellen, welcome back. It's been a long time since you were part of the real world. Raising the kids alone, well, it wasn't easy. But the neighbors were friendly, if you catch my drift. Demi took care of you while you were with us. You two actually grew pretty close. You don't remember, of course, but it was months before I even stepped in. The police were watching in the beginning. But like everyone else, Eventually they stopped caring. Just like I did. Each word sank like a blade, twisting deeper. Andrea's voice trembled, but her eyes burned with fury. "He did this to you, Mom," she whispered. "He stole everything. I never want to lay eyes on him again." Tears welled up and spilled over as my entire body began to shake. My own husband, the man I built a life with, the father of my children, had orchestrated my disappearance like some kind of criminal mastermind. He ripped me away from my world, from my family, and buried me in a haze of drugs and manipulation for almost a decade. And now he was gone. Slipped through the cracks. Living freely in some foreign country with no fear of facing justice. But I was alive. I wasn't dead anymore. And I would find a way. I would. Then came the rest of the letter, the part that shattered whatever pieces of my heart were still intact. "I have to admit," Andrea read, her voice struggling to stay even, "there were parts of it I thoroughly enjoyed. You were lonely. Desperate for connection. You clung to any form of affection, and in those moments, you became surprisingly affectionate. I gave you what you wanted, softness, closeness, comfort, things you used to withhold from me, but offered so easily to him. I could barely breathe. My vision blurred, not just from the tears but from the rage swelling behind them. If you're curious about how we kept you so compliant," she continued, "you can thank the government for that. One of the companies I acquired had a long-standing contract with the Department of Defense. Somewhere along the way we got our hands on documents tied to something called the Groundhog Day Protocol." She paused, visibly shaken, then forced herself to keep reading. It was a military-designed method for interrogations. They blended anesthesia, stimulants, and a third agent, something that scrambled short-term memory. The subject would remember who they were, who they trusted, but not what happened the day before. Reset them. You were perfect for it. I closed my eyes, the words crashing over me like a wave. They used it to avoid messy interrogations, lawsuits, and scandals. Every morning you'd look at me with those familiar eyes, hopeful, trusting, and ask me to help you get out. Every time I told you I would. And every time, you forgot we'd had that same conversation 100 times before. My chest heaved. My mouth was dry. I could barely sit upright, but I didn't stop her. I needed to hear it. I did what I said I would. "I set you free," she read, her voice like steel now. "Demi was with you 6 days a week. Sundays were yours alone. She managed your medication. She kept you quiet, compliant. You were asleep most of the day, about 12 hours, give or take. You didn't have time to fall apart." Andrea stopped reading and looked at me, but the last few lines were still there, etched into the page. She didn't have to say them. I already knew what they said. Sometimes to keep you motivated, she'd withhold food for a bit. Just enough to keep you active. She took care of your hair too. Honestly, she got better at cutting it than you ever were. The room was silent. I sat there, shattered in the most complete way a person can be. My past, my memories, my family, my sense of self, all of it had been turned into an experiment. A cycle. A nightmare. And they had been the ones turning the wheel day after day. "I was faithful to you, you know," Andrea read, her voice tense and trembling. "Completely until the day you vanished." I stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. My hands were trembling in my lap. "I hired Demi right out of high school. She wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, definitely not the brightest candle on the birthday cake. But she was loyal. And gullible. To this day she still believes the whole thing was some classified government mission." Andrea paused and looked up at me, waiting for some signal that I could take more. I nodded, just barely. "She signed an employment contract," she continued, "one that warned her she'd face extreme consequences, torture, even death, if she ever said a word about you. Of course that was just there to keep her scared and quiet. What I didn't anticipate was falling in love with her. Over those 8 years we got married." A long, painful silence followed. "And you," she read, voice tight, "you really got into those cheap paperback romance novels. You devoured them, sometimes one a day. With only old recorded music and books to keep you company, I imagine you didn't have much else. It's going to take you a while to get caught up with the world. Let's just say things got weird. We've got game show hosts running countries and people who dodged the draft lecturing others about patriotism. Total madness. Honestly, I'm glad to be out of it and heading overseas." He had written this like a farewell note. A twisted goodbye. "I guess you thought you could sneak around with Evan and I'd never find out," she read. "Didn't quite go that way, did it?" That last line hung in the air like smoke. "The day you disappeared, neither of you had any idea what was happening. My people were able to inject you both, quick, silent, efficient. You were too distracted to notice." I clenched my fist. Every word felt like another nail in the coffin of who I thought he was. As for Evan, she continued, her voice now filled with disgust, he didn't fare too well. If he were one of your horses, I think the word you'd use is gelded. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. I turned away, unable to listen, but I couldn't stop her either. Your mother. I'm sorry, Andrea read, her voice starting to break. I think losing you destroyed her. She held on for as long as she could, but she wasn't the same without you. I closed my eyes. But the kids? They bounced back faster than you'd expect. I'm going to miss them, but they're grown now. And when they see the trust funds I set up, I doubt they'll miss me too much. The next line made Andrea hesitate before she said it aloud. If only we had signed a prenuptial agreement. I wasn't about to hand over $20 million to you and your little lover. Can you believe the law? You've got to be missing for 7 full years before the courts will declare someone dead. Bureaucratic nonsense. My entire body ached. The letter was a confession, a mockery, a final act of psychological warfare. And Paul had written it as casually as someone writing postcards from a vacation. He had stolen everything, my life, my years, my voice, and now he was somewhere far away, living without consequence. But I was still here. And I would be heard. I would have let you go sooner, Andrea continued reading, her voice quieter now, trembling at the edges, but the timing just didn't work out. I stared blankly, each sentence from Paul twisting deeper into my soul. The good news is, she read, my company more than tripled in value during those 7 years. I didn't plan on dragging things out this long, but the sale of the business took 6 months longer than expected. It finally went through a few weeks ago. Holding on until then? Absolutely worth it. Andrea paused to catch her breath. I could see how much it hurt her to keep going, but she did. There was another reason I kept the charade going for exactly 7 years, she read. Remember those life insurance policies we signed right after the wedding? The $1 million ones. I nodded silently, the memory of signing those papers flooding back like a ghost from a former life. We'd agreed that each year, assuming no medical complications, the face value would increase by 10%, without a medical exam. So, when you disappeared, your policy was sitting just above $5 million. My heart sank. But by the time I declared you dead and cashed it out, it had grown to over $10 million. From a financial standpoint, it was a smart move. With your accounting background, I'm sure you can appreciate the logic. I gritted my teeth, stunned by the casual cruelty of it. I didn't keep the money, Andrea continued, her voice strained. I set up trust funds for Andrea and William. That way I avoided splitting my wealth with them. You were legally dead, so your share became useful. There was silence in the room, heavy and suffocating. I gave Andrea a little extra, she read. She always had a soft heart. I figured she'd want to help you get back on your feet. You're still young enough to find someone new. Maybe you'll get rich selling your story to the tabloids. It wouldn't surprise me if someone came calling with a book deal. My hands were shaking in my lap. He wasn't finished. I like knowing I left you with something to look forward to, she continued. But if you're wondering why I didn't just end your life, well, what would be the point of that? There's no revenge in death. There's no suffering. The word echoed in my mind. You didn't even realize what was happening. Day after day you simply faded away. You turned to dust without even knowing it. You had everything and it still wasn't enough. You made your choices and now... Andrea's voice cracked. Now you've lost something you can never get back. 8 years. Gone. She could barely speak the last line. Try to imagine the kind of love I had for you, she read. Always and forever. Just like we said in our wedding vows. Paul. There was silence again, but not the peaceful kind. This was the silence that follows destruction. I couldn't cry. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, staring through the air like I could still see the pieces of my life floating down, out of reach. And then Christina placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. For the second time in your life, Mary Ellen, she said softly, you've been declared officially alive. I completely broke down. I lost control, utterly and violently. I thrashed, screamed, threw my fists at walls until the bones in my hands ached, kicked furniture until my feet gave out. I don't even remember everything I did, only the raw pain in my body afterward and the overwhelming emptiness that drove me to it. They said I was having a psychotic break. Maybe I was. I don't know what else to call it when the truth hits you like that and there's nowhere left for the rage and grief to go. Since then, I've been in weekly counseling. Every single week without fail. Disturbed is the closest word they can use in polite conversation, but it doesn't come close to what I've felt. Some days I hold it together. Other days it all rushes back, and I unravel all over again. Regaining my status as a living person has been its own kind of purgatory. I open new accounts only to have them shut down days later because somewhere, in some ancient database, I'm still listed as legally deceased. Proving you exist turns out to be a full-time job when the system has already buried you. Paul and Demi were formally indicted on a long and horrifying list of charges. But it didn't matter. They vanished just like before. No extradition. No justice. They're out there somewhere living their lives, free and married, while I pick up the pieces of a life they tried to erase. And as much as it hurts to admit, the tabloids ate the story alive. The headlines wrote themselves. The woman who came back from the dead. The wife who vanished. The betrayal. The captivity. The manhunt. All of it. The public couldn't get enough. My son, William, stepped in as my agent, managing the chaos with a professionalism I never knew he had. Between the book deal, the film rights, and the interviews, I now live comfortably. More than comfortably if I'm being honest. But comfort doesn't always bring peace. These days I spend my time surrounded by my grandchildren. They're the only true joy I know now. I pour everything into them, the love I was never allowed to give, the time I lost, the years that were stolen from me. As for starting over romantically, I just don't want to. People ask sometimes. I tell them I'm fine. But the truth is I have no desire to open that part of myself again. I gave it once, fully, completely. And what I got in return nearly destroyed me. So that's it. That's where my story ends, for now. Was it what you expected? Or did it take a turn you didn't see coming? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Have you ever known someone who survived something like this? Or do you carry your own version of betrayal that no one else can see? Let's talk. Let's make space for each other. If this story kept you gripped, go ahead and tap that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you're new here or you've been watching but haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join the community. I post raw, gripping stories every day and I'd love for you to be part of it. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications and stay close. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.